Welcome to Caribbean Tea. From St. Vincent, Kendol Morgan. In Georgetown, Guyana, Denis Chabrol. And I am Vivian Williams in New York. This is Caribbean Tea, the podcast where we stir the pot on the region's most pressing issues: social, cultural, economic, legal, and political, with unflinching honesty and thoughtful analysis. Today we confront one of the most controversial geopolitical actions of our time. President Donald Trump has ordered U.S. military forces into Venezuela, a sovereign country, to extract its sitting president, Nicolás Maduro. The response has been sharply divided, with condemnation from political opponents in the United States, world leaders, and major international organizations, including the United Nations. At the same time, the United States has declared it will run Venezuela, oversee its rebuilding, determine who governs, and extract oil and natural resources, taking revenue from the sales. What remains deeply unclear is how Venezuela will now be governed, under what authority, and for how long.
For Latin America and the Caribbean, this moment touches a deep historical nerve. External intervention, leadership removal, and control over resources are lived experiences in the region. From Guatemala to Grenada, Panama to Haiti, history shows us that removing a leader often marks the beginning of uncertainty, not its end. The Caribbean must now assess whether this moment brings stability or a new cycle of risk.
The speed and scope of these developments have stunned the public. Military action, governance control, resource extraction, and international condemnation are unfolding simultaneously. Debate is raging inside the United States, while the UN and others question legality and legitimacy. Tonight, we cut through the noise to examine what this actually means on the ground and for the Caribbean. To unpack these extraordinary developments, we're joined by a panel with deep regional and security experience. Dr. Mark Curtin is a respected Caribbean diplomat and a scholar with decades of experience in hemispheric relations and international governance. Mr. Donald Ramata, former president of Guyana, brings the perspective of a former head of government whose country sits at the intersection of oil, sovereignty, and territorial tension with Venezuela. And Mr. Gary Griffith, former Commissioner of Police of Trinidad and Tobago, offers critical insight into security, state authority, and the risks that follow sudden power displacement. This is Caribbean Tea. Let's begin, Dennis.
At my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II.
In a dramatic military operation on January 3, 2026, U.S. Special Forces carried out an assault against Venezuelan targets in Caracas and the surrounding areas that resulted in the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores. The operation, reportedly conducted with U.S. Army Delta Force and other elements, was confirmed by multiple U.S. outlets and official statements, and followed months of preparation linked to long-standing U.S. legal actions against Maduro. After being taken into custody during the early morning raid, Maduro and Flores were transported out of Venezuela, first reportedly to the USS Iwo Jima and then to the United States. They arrived in New York, where they are now being held in federal custody in connection with a U.S. Department of Justice indictment unsealed in the Southern District of New York, charging both with serious offenses, including narco-terrorism and related criminal conspiracies. President Donald Trump has publicly stated that the United States will run Venezuela, at least temporarily, and oversee a transition, including managing the country's resources, while Venezuelan officials have condemned the action as a violation of sovereignty and international law. The capture and the transfer of a sitting head of state to face trial in U.S. courts is virtually unprecedented in modern international relations and has triggered strong global reactions, from condemnation by the United Nations and several world governments to praise from some U.S. lawmakers and allies. With that, let's now get into the broader discussion of governance, sovereignty, and the Caribbean's response.
While the capture of a sitting head of state in his own country is really indeed an unusual activity, an unusual event in global affairs. So a good place to start our discussion is really, what does the capture of a sitting head of state by a foreign military mean under international law and an interaction among states? Dr. Curtin, you want to start off here?
Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to be part of your distinguished panel today. Now, indeed, when one looks at the unfolding situation, there is a level of uncertainty still. There are still very many moving parts, but one could argue almost immediately that the global community has always yearned for a rules-based international order, which has sorely been upset, violated by this recent move by the United States to intervene directly and to extract a sitting head of state. One could argue here that while there have been more recent or several recent violations of international law, where the U.S. Armada in the Caribbean Sea, in international waters, plucked boats and killed more than 80 people. We see this as a furtherance of that type of activity, which has led to serious concern about those violations. Condemnation has come from all parts of the world. Some people celebrate, but my view is that if we're talking about a rules-based international order, and if we talk about, adherence, the principles and practices of international law and the Charter of United Nations, it is, one cannot condone, but only condemn that serious violation of international law. Although I argue that in the case of Venezuela, we in Guyana have seen some violations of international law over the years since 1966 by Venezuela itself. And while we have moved across the legal process and ending up in the International Court of Justice, we've seen Venezuela also violating the norms of international law and practice. So I would say that while this act by the United States, by President Trump, has gone beyond that, it crossed the line of sovereignty, and the act has really been one that has surely violated all of the practices, all the principles, and borders on, bullyism in a real sense.
Mr. Ramatar, you sat at the helm of a sovereign state for some time. Looking on at this as someone who was a head of state, what's your initial reaction to this reality that we woke up to on the 3rd of January?
I think it's a very tragic development that has taken place, because I think we are back to the stage where might is right. We are the law of the jungle, and where sovereignty is becoming meaningless as international laws are being destroyed, and all international law and international institutions are being disregarded and undermined. What has happened on Saturday morning, yesterday morning, is a continuation of what has been happening for some time now in our country, where the United States, in order to try to restore some of its lost position in trade and in other areas of international life, has now resorted to brute force to reinstate themselves as the number one power in the world. They want to displace China from the Caribbean. They want to replace everybody else in the Middle East. That's why they were supporting the genocide in the Gaza, and they continue to support it right now as the ethnic cleansing continues in the West Bank, in Palestine, and in other areas too. We see them. Their idea is to get rid of any type of competition and to own as much of the world as they possibly can. Latin America and the Caribbean, because of its geographical proximity, is now probably an easy target for them. And Venezuela is a big victim in this regard. I know that a lot of people, I have made a comment on Facebook, and there was a lot of criticism, but I think people are mixing up our problems with Venezuela on the border issue, on this much more dangerous situation that has developed within the country, within the world, for that matter. Because I don't know if anyone isn't thinking that any country now, with whatever resources they have, will try to if they are serious about if they are very serious about their sovereignty and their independence, will have to try to find ways and means where they can protect themselves. And there's no other way you can protect yourself against big powers unless some people try to start to get nuclear weapons. I believe a lot of heads of government might start thinking in that direction, which will create a proliferation of very, very dangerous weapons all over the world. And it reminds me of Einstein's comment that you can't prepare for war and expect to have peace. And it's making the world a far more dangerous place for all of us, because we all know that if a nuclear war ever breaks out, that's the end of all of us, whether we have it or not. So I think what has happened now is going to place our world in a very much more dangerous place, because I suppose Iran must be thinking, I am next, and they must thinking what they will have to do. North Korea will be thinking of increasing their stockpile instead of instead of us trying to move towards a reduction and create a safer world. Many countries will now be thinking, how do I protect myself from bigger countries who would like to bully me?
President Ramatar, before you go on, you made a very important point, and I don't want it to be lost. I want to ask a follow-up question to that before you continue. When you talk about this may create an impetus for states to go down the path of a sort of an arms race, do you see this kind of proliferation of weapons evolving in a sort of a clandestine, or the prospect of a clandestine arms race where countries begin to work not simply by themselves, but clandestinely as blocks in order to build up the kind of military muscle they need to repel this kind of action?
I don't know. I won't be able to predict how it will turn out, whether it will be by blocks or by individual countries. But I do know that countries will be doing this in a very silent way, and will try to hide as much as possible what they're doing, so that they can make it a reality. But I honestly believe that this is setting a dangerous precedent for a proliferation of weapons of mass destruction all over the world, where people, or maybe some people might look for cheaper options and get chemical weapons, all that are illegal and so forth, because there's no law anymore that for small countries like ours. Those who, I'm speaking now for many of those who criticized me for what I said in my post yesterday. If we in Guyana, because a lot of people I think get carried away with the problem that we have with Venezuela, but if we in Guyana don't respect international law and uphold international law and advocate for international law, we are subjecting ourselves to a lot as a small country, to a lot of pressure. And that is the point I was trying to make to them. You can't want to condemn Venezuela for violating international law and attacking us, and on the other hand, support illegal activities against the sovereign country of Venezuela. That's what I would like to say at this point in time.
As a follow-up to the question that that Vivian asked, maybe not necessarily groups, but could it be that we see the development of power centers out of that, where the U.S. is signaling that, and again, based on its recent security strategy, that the hemisphere is its backyard, going back to the Monroe Doctrine. Can we see the emerging superpower China seeing East Asia as its own backyard, and Russia, as it is signaling through its war with Ukraine, seeing the rest of Asia as another center for it to control, and the world being developed into these into countries being sorted out around power centers?
That seems to be a logical direction that things can go. But I think I want to make this point, because I believe that a lot of commentators are getting carried away with more of the Western type of propaganda about China. China is not threatening anyone. China is not threatening any country. China built up its military as a reaction to what has been happening, the attacks that they have been going through. But China needs peace. China is trying to promote as much peace as possible, because they see that it's with peace that they can have a better life for the people. They can create better conditions and create better economic situation for them. And that's why their foreign policy is a totally different foreign policy than we have in the West. All of us, when we talk about foreign policy, we have been trained to talk about our interests and what is our interest and what is everybody's interest. China has evolved a new kind of foreign policy to talk about win-win type of foreign policy, where they want to relate with other countries in the world, and where both sides will have benefits out of those relationships, and not to have it in one way, not to go into only for the people's oil, but to go for other, to help develop countries' infrastructure, to create their ability to develop their productive forces, and to create conditions for them to develop their economy. So I just want to clear that point, because...
Not to belabor that point, Mr. Ramata, but what about China's relations with Taiwan? And it's
Taiwan is part of China. I don't know if you know the history of it. Taiwan has always been a part of China. In fact, what is a bit hypocritical on the part of the West, who talk about China and Taiwan, when they recognize China, and when China entered the United Nations, and all the countries, including the United States, that have diplomatic relationships with China, recognize that there's a one China policy, and they recognize that Taiwan belongs to China. They all said it. This is not that I am making this up. This is on their own expression, that Taiwan is an integral part of China.
We're talking here like a new dimension emerging, where power raw power of the major states seem to be prevailing over multilateralism, which I believe has to be put in place or restored for this world order to be reconditioned. Because we can't look at only China or Russia or the United States. I think that we're talking about a new level of multipolarity and where the multilateralism has to play a role. And to my mind, that may help to reduce or to de-escalate some of the current issues which are emerging globally. So I would say, and I think that President Ravizar is correct, that we're moving into a dangerous kind of world, but I think we, as a set of the global community, can really help in moving towards stronger United Nations, stronger levels of multilateralism, which can help us all.
Mr. Griffith, I don't know if you want to respond to the question on the floor, but I have a different dimension that I wanted to put to you. But I give you an opportunity if you want to have a say here.
Well, I think I don't want to contradict the goodly excellency, but Taiwan has never been ruled by China. Taiwan has its own government. Taiwan has its own military. So even though it is largely disputed whether Taiwan belongs to China or not, because of the pressure that you will get from Beijing, many countries will back off based on the same situation with Russia and Ukraine, probably based on the same situation with United States and Venezuela. But to state that Taiwan belongs to China, Taiwan has its own government, they have its own military, and China has claimed for a very long time that it's supposed to be a province of Taiwan is supposed to be a province of China. The same way Venezuela has now been claiming that Trinidad and Tobago is supposed to be a territory of Venezuela. On most occasions, countries do that as the justifiable excuse to invade a country, to take them, to seize them. It's what we usually do. If they say that something belongs to me and you have it, I am going to take it from you whether you like it or not. That is what usually causes wars. So whether it is China, Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine, United States, Venezuela, it is more of the same.
Mr. Griffith,
I don't want to divert I don't want to divert from our main topic and follow to this. But I think you need to brush up on your geography a bit. Taiwan has always been a part of China. It was seized by Japan in the first instances. And when the civil war was happening in China, the defeated Kuomintang army escaped to Taiwan. So it's not a question of this is a territory of China.
So how can a country have a government running a country and you say that another country runs it?
It's just like if you have a federal state. Look at the United States, it's made up of 52 states.
No.
They've got their own government.
The United States does not 52 governments.
No, but why should anybody be encouraging Taiwan to be a separate country? I don't mind them being a federal state, but why would you encourage them to be a separate country when they are historically always been a part of China?
So then based on that theory, then Trinidad and Tobago should succumb and be accepted under Venezuela because it was belonging to Venezuela 2 billion years ago. You don't do that.
That is nonsense.
No, it's not. You cannot be half pregnant. You cannot be half pregnant. Because then the same reason you're using, we should justify Trinidad and Tobago should belong to Venezuela. Or
2 days ago, Venezuela said that Trinidad belongs to them as a reaction to maybe the government of Trinidad's position.
No, but Venezuela did that based on the theory of what happened hundreds of years
ago. There has never been any historical link with Venezuela and Trinidad to say that Trinidad belongs to Venezuela.
Well, Venezuela did say that. They gave
recently, 2 days ago.
Well, it doesn't matter. 2 days or 2 years, they said it.
Anyway, let's move on.
This is some lively discussion, but let's move back to Venezuela. Mr. Griffith, I want to introduce a new dimension and have you start off with the discussion on that, and we develop from there. It appears that President Trump is framing his action as one where the United States is reining in a rogue leader and a rogue state, and therefore evoking some kind of law enforcement and regulation of using the might of the United States to make sure that rogue nations and rogue leaders do not proliferate and do not continue to exist without some measure of restraint. Before I ask you to lean in with your take on it, let's listen to how President Trump frames this, and then we could pick up the discussion from there.
Maduro and Flores have been indicted in the Southern District of New York. It's Jay Clayton for their campaign of deadly narco-terrorism against the United States and its citizens. I want to thank the men and women of our military who achieved such an extraordinary success overnight with breathtaking speed, power, precision, and competence. The illegitimate dictator Maduro was the kingpin of a vast criminal network responsible for trafficking colossal amounts of deadly and illicit drugs into the United States. As alleged in the indictment, he personally oversaw the vicious cartel known as Cartel de las Solas, which flooded our nation with lethal poison, responsible for the deaths of countless Americans, the many, many Americans. Hundreds of thousands over the years of Americans died because of him. Maduro and his wife will soon face the full might of American justice and stand trial on American soil. For many years after his term as president of Venezuela expired, Maduro remained in power and waged a ceaseless campaign of violence, terror, and subversion against the United States of America, threatening not only our people, but the stability of the entire region. And you all saw it. In addition to trafficking gigantic amounts of illegal drugs that inflicted untold suffering and human destruction all over the country, all over in particular the United States, Maduro sent savage and murderous gangs, including the bloodthirsty prison gang Tren de Aragua, to terrorize American communities nationwide. And he did indeed. They were in Colorado. They took over apartment complexes. They cut the fingers off people if they call police.
This is a different framing. President Trump is trying to position the United States as a sort of sanitizing the global community of rogue leaders and rogue state. And he is positioning this action by the United States in a positive light. I'd like to start off with you, Mr. Griffith, whether this is a sufficient and a proper justification for what we have witnessed on January 3rd, or whether this is more of pretext. And then we'll get to the other panelists.
And again, yeah, sure. And again, with all of this, it goes back to the perception of how people feel. It goes right back to my point. Taiwan has never been ruled by China, but people believe that Taiwan becomes part of China. It's the same way that the United States may feel that they have a right to enter another country's territory to extract their leader based on the concern of the United States. My take on this, this is not in any way for me to justify what the United States has done. My take on it is that what I have seen is that the bully has been bullied. Going right back to what Maduro has done over the last few years to Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, on 3 times before the cock crowed, Maduro threatened Trinidad and Tobago. He stated that he lied to the world when he said that we were a launching pad being used to destabilize Venezuela, and he intends to enter any country to extract those individuals. Strike 2 is when he stated that Trinidad and Tobago is a territory of Venezuela. Anytime a country says that, it's the same China-Taiwan situation. It gives justification and the excuse to go into that country to invade them. And 3 was most recent when the defense minister said, if the United States does anything to Venezuela, Trinidad and Tobago will know what will happen to them. That is the typical bully. So he has done this for the last 3 decades as a soldier, as a commissioner, as a security advisor, as a security minister. Venezuela's La Guardia Nacional have invaded our territorial waters constantly, attacking our fishermen, seizing their vessels, seizing their nets, seizing their catch. So I have no tear to shed based on what has happened. I'm not trying to justify it, but sometimes, the end justifies the mean. I was very concerned as a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago that Maduro will actually come good on his threats, especially that of his defense minister. But again, going back to to the regional concept. This is not the first time. We'd have seen something recent, well, not recently, we'd have seen it with Manuel Noriega. You have seen the United States do something like this. This is not a first in the Western Hemisphere. My take on this is that we've been spending so much time trying to ascertain whether the United States is right or wrong, whether Maduro is a criminal or he has been kidnapped. I think the focus should be on where do we go from here as a region, and that should be the concern. Because I remember when I was in the United Nations mission in Haiti, where a similar situation, thousands of Haitians, they were leaving Haiti, going across to Jamaica, Bahamas, and other islands, and it was causing havoc. That is my concern. My concern is also whether it is that criminal elements in Venezuela will now try to divert to Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago with illegal drugs and weapons because of the situation. My concern is whether is it over until the Delcy sings? Is it that Delcy is going to be put on a leash and controlled by the United States, or is she still going to push the Maduro agenda, press that button that can launch missiles into Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago? Those are my concerns, and having that it should be more priority for us to have conversation. Because what's throughout Trinidad and Tobago, the biggest conversation is not what I just said. The biggest conversation is whether Maduro is right or wrong, or whether Trump is right or wrong. Not my business at this time, not a concern of Trinidad and Tobago. It's good for conversational purpose in a rum shop. The main concern is where do we go from here as a region? CARICOM has been virtually fragmented because of this situation. How do we unify CARICOM based on situations involving two countries that are not part of CARICOM?
Yeah, when I listened to the clip that you played, President Trump was heralding what one might term tactical success. But when you look at what is the end game, I've heard nothing about democratic renewal, nothing about what the people of Venezuela could expect from that quote-unquote regime change, which to my mind is not regime change. As we've seen where Delcy Rodriguez, who one might argue controls the Chavistas and all, and that too may be a tactic of the US to ensure some levels of continuity and ensure that that they are in touch with those who still wield some levels of power. But I believe that the overall strategy, where you talk about people's lives, we've heard nothing about it in relation to the question that has been raised and the issues that followed the intervention into Venezuela. And what might also be important for us as a region is to attempt to deal with the levels of fragmentation which have permeated our region, the CARICOM region, and what we need to do in relation to ensuring that our strategic interests are protected, that, Mr. Trump has talked about renewing the sphere of influence and the so-called Donroe Doctrine, as he now calls it, Donald and Monroe, and its potential impact not only on the Caribbean, but in the broader hemisphere, and the issues of sovereignty that may arise. So I think those are significant issues which we need to look at in the context of what took place yesterday. What are some of the potential implications for countries like Guyana itself? President Trump, the transactionalist, may very well influence whoever is the new government in Venezuela to look at continue to look at Guyana as Essequibo as theirs, and therefore we have those issues which I think we really need to unpack and analyze very significantly.
I think we got to call a spade from time to time. I think one of the good things about President Trump, he doesn't leave much to your imagination. In his press conference yesterday, he spoke very clearly what is the main interest of the United States in Venezuela, Venezuela's natural resources. That is what it is. To me, the talk about drugs is a pretext. is a complete pretext for the illegality that has gone on there, and the trumped up charge that they're putting on Maduro. Because why I say that, I say that not out of any emotion, but if you look at the United Nations report on drug trafficking in this year, 2025, you will see that Venezuela is mentioned once, where they said a small amount of drugs passed through Venezuela on its way to Europe and the United States from Colombia. And the European Union report on drugs, narcotics from our region has not even mentioned Venezuela once in its report this year. So therefore, and a former United Nations head of the drugs department of the UN that creates these reports said in his time, in the early part of this century, Cuba was immaculate, and Venezuela then was the next best country in the region as far as fighting drugs are concerned. And in Venezuela, they don't have no big cocaine production or anything like that. So based on those facts, I would say that what we are seeing, the talk about drugs in Venezuela, is used as an excuse to carry out this illegal activity that has just taken place and the violation of the sovereignty of an independent country. Yeah. So that is for if United States is really serious about fighting drugs, then they should use their enormous resources that they have to deal with the market that is in it, that is causing the drug, that is fueling the drug trade. And they should deal with the many banks in the United States that launder most of the drug money that is created. That would be an effective way of fighting the drug situation if that is the issue. So let us be very clear. What is taking place here is a grab for resources. The United States feel that other countries are moving into the area, particularly China, and they want to have those resources for themselves. In fact, Trump said explicitly that it is our oil and we want it back because the oil was nationalized by Venezuela in the early part of this century when to serve the Venezuelan people more. So that is the crux of the matter. That is the very fact of the matter is that, as they mentioned very clearly, they want to have the control this part of the territory. And talking about just by the way, in passing, to say that the Monroe Doctrine, when it came out in 1823, was more of an anti-colonial position against France and Britain and Spain and Portugal that was dominating this part of the world. This corollary of the, if you want to call it that, the Roosevelt corollary and this Trump corollary is a recolonialization of the continent. It's a total opposite thing that is taking place at this point in time. That those who you cannot express any disagreement, your visa is being taken away, and all of that is being happening. People from the United Nations got their visa pulled; they can't go to address United Nations committee. Genocide is taking place and allowed, protected, and defended. Courts, that the international courts that want to bring criminals to justice are being threatened, and all of that. I think those are the things that we must talk about.
In the case of Venezuela, it was, and I know there have been different descriptions of what took place, including extraction. But for the rest of the hemisphere, including and especially in the Caribbean, it could be things like denying of the visa that President Ramata mentioned, and the absence of multinational entities that can protect small island states must be of concern to the CARICOM region, given what has happened to a fairly decent-sized country compared to what can happen to these micro-states if a pretext is found to enter a country or to pressure a country that is doing something that the U.S. Does not favor, the U.S. administration does not favor. And I wanted to raise for some reaction from the panel, some thoughts from one of the regional leaders on Saturday evening following the activity in Venezuela, where one of the countries that recently had visa restrictions imposed. And what seemed to have been a reaction to that, the decision to forego Cuban medical expertise and the decision to cut the Cuban medical brigade that was providing much needed health services in that particular country.
That's Antigua and Barbuda.
Indeed. And also to agree to accept third-party deportees from the United States based on a request from the White House. So is it that while we may not have the extraction that happened to Maduro, that there may be other pretexts under which countries are brought in line?
Just to clarify, I wouldn't question President His Excellency's comments about Venezuela. However, I just have to add, let us not believe that Venezuela is the land of milk and honey. As Commissioner of Police, I went through hell with the Venezuelan drug cartel. So maybe the United Nations and them should have contacted the Trinidad and Tobago Special Branch or SSA and others to understand how massive that drug ring is. And this is not to me in any way trying to justify what the United States did, because that happens all over the world. But the perception that Venezuela is clean, no. I encountered numerous murders because of the Venezuelan drug cartel. Many persons in that Venezuelan mafia came to Trinidad and Tobago. They started controlling drug blocks. They started putting hits on other gang leaders, started trying to control gangs. I am talking about cold-blooded murder in broad daylight in Port of Spain and Glencoe by the Venezuelan drug cartel. A lot of the illegal drugs that came to Trinidad and Tobago came from Venezuela. A lot of the illegal weapons came from Venezuela. Human trafficking, 99% of human trafficking in Trinidad and Tobago came from Venezuela. Child prostitution. You go to every single place where it is that you open. It's Carmen Conchita. It is little girls from Venezuela, 14 and 15 years old, being run by Venezuelans, having these little children as prostitutes. So that's just, let's clarify when I hear the comment that, oh, Venezuela is so clean because there was no report. I, as the Commissioner of Police, went through hell because of what went on in Venezuela. This is not in any way, as I said, for me to justify what the United States did, but as I went back, my focus is to see how does it help the Southern Caribbean, the benefits that we can get from it. You see when one country gets lemon, we can make lemonade because it can benefit us from a security perspective. The United States has been tremendous in assisting the CARICOM as it pertains to security by equipment, training, assets, technology, and they will continue to do so. We turn our backs in the United States. It certainly has and will never be Venezuela there to support us to secure our exclusive economic zone.
President Ramatar, I think, was very straight and strong on this view that the focus is on the natural resource, the assets in Venezuela. But my concern would be whether or not, I haven't heard at all about the structure that they will put in place. I'm only hearing about from President Trump and his people that there will be investment and big oil companies will be there. But you don't hear about what it is that the people will enjoy.
I don't know if Mr. Ramatar wants to add quickly to that.
Just very quickly. I mean, I'm not doubting Mr. Griffith, what he's saying. I'm not saying any. I hope I'm not giving an impression that there was milk and honey in Venezuela. I know that there is not milk and honey in Venezuela. But I'm speaking on the basis of official reports. And even if what you were saying, which let's take it that is true because that's your experience, it's worse in other countries in our region. Yeah. Much worse in Colombia, in other places and so forth. So does that mean that the United States should go in there and kill the people and kidnap their president? But the other point I want to make very quickly, why is the situation so bad in Venezuela that all of these things, antisocial things that you mentioned, are happening? it came about because of the sanctions, the seizing of Venezuela's money in the banks in the United States and in Europe, the refusal to sell them parts for their oil refineries and so forth, and their drilling machines and so forth. And they created not only them, I don't say that the Venezuelan government doesn't have blame, but that is not the focus here. It's the outside pressure on Venezuela that has created an abominable economic situation that has led to all of these antisocial things that you speak about. And that is what we have to talk about as well, because it's affected all of us, as you rightly point out, that these things are coming into our countries and so forth.
There are those who support the U.S.'s intervention in Venezuela on Saturday by saying that the Caribbean has been basically going to the United States almost on an annual basis, either individually or collectively, with a begging bowl for assistance in dealing with security issues, the smuggling of guns, also dealing with the whole question of the narco trade and demand and supply issues. And for decades, these issues still remain on the table. In some instances, they've gotten worse. We've seen here in Guyana, up to about a year and a half ago, handguns coming in the barrels. I think the same for Trinidad. And so the crime situation in the Caribbean has not improved, despite the fact that Caribbean governments have gone to the United States collectively and individually seeking help. Now we have got what a BBC reporter had called more than 20 years ago the world's military police, trying to address, in part, the crime situation while looking at its own interest in the area of the energy sector. What do you say to this, gentlemen?
Now, one could recognize here that the Caribbean is a transit point between supply and demand countries. Now, my view has always been that you have to look at on the demand side and argue for measures to be put in place in countries like the United States and recently in Europe, etc., to deal with the demand. We don't produce any cocaine, and as Mr. President Ramata indicated, the UNODC reports indicated Venezuela itself is not really a strong producer of any drugs. But here we see a reluctance by the United States to deal with the situation. Small states of the region don't have the resources to deal with that transit arrangement, but still you get concerns raised about people trafficking if you get Cuban doctors and medical brigade in small states. And I think it's contradiction after contradiction by the United States. So my view is that while we recognize that there is a growing trend in relation to the drugs in the Caribbean, we have to ensure, to my mind, that we have a regional approach, first of all, that all are on board the Caribbean, and that the United States and those larger states, which are recipients through the transit routes, are really putting resources to stop that, even in their own domestic arrangements. In other words, education in the United States, some levels of reduction in the drug use and so on, rather than looking at the Caribbean and say, y'all got to try with this. It's a demand and supply issue.
Gentlemen,
the demand argument, Professor, before the other gentlemen come in, the demand argument has been around for more than 30 years. And you look right through the island chain, and there are now various gangs as a result of drugs. What do you say to that? When here a man comes in, apparently deals with the problem of Maduro for the U.S.'s own energy interests, but on the other hand tries to address the crime situation in many ways. Here in Guyana, for instance, we have heard repeatedly from the government that the Trinidad gang has been spilling over into Guyana and creating some problems at the border.
Well, I've seen.
If I may make my final comment on this issue about about the drug situation. Since 1974, President Nixon declared war on drugs. Since then, the United States have been going in, bombing some places in Colombia, drug places, and so forth. But the situation has gotten worse. It has not got since from 1974 to now. How many years? 50 years or more? That they are 52 years that they are fighting the drug war, and instead of making headway, it's getting worse. Isn't it time to think about some new approaches to this? Do we believe that only military and police methods will deal with this issue? I think that is where I think we should try to challenge the thinkers in the various think tanks that we have in the Americas to look at, because it's very, very clear. If it's a war, from what Nixon's talk about, we're losing that war. Therefore, we need to change tactics.
Gentlemen, on this issue, we could talk for several hours. I want to hem it up this way. What we're seeing from the United States framing of this issue is a significant shift that takes into consideration America asserting itself as the global police and is creating a new dimension of international intercourse among states. And here is where I think the US framing tries to create some level of adherence to international law and international customs, but creating a vehicle that distinguishes what it is doing. And it comes down to something that I think everyone should be asking and might be asking. How it is a sitting head of state is being prosecuted, plucked from his own country, and is being prosecuted in another country, where that very country does not prosecute its own head of state while that head of state is in power. And this is what it comes down to. It comes down to the whole international principle, which is what I think we're talking a lot about, immunity for heads of state. And one of the central legal issues arising from the capture of Nicolás Maduro and his indictment in New York is whether a sitting head of state can be prosecuted at all by another state. Under traditional international law, heads of state generally enjoy absolute immunity from prosecution in courts of another country if they are in office. This rule exists to protect the sovereignty and the independence of nations. The idea being that one state should not be able to subject another sovereign to its courts. The principle is rooted in the concept that a head of state represents the state itself, and allowing foreign courts to prosecute sitting heads or sitting leaders would undermine the sovereign equality of nations. It is reflected in customary international law and in diplomatic practice, and has been upheld in precedents such as cases involving arrest warrants issued against foreign leaders for serious crimes. However, the application of immunity depends heavily on recognition and context. In the US legal system, immunity for a foreign leader depends on whether the US government recognizes that leader as the legitimate head of state. In Maduro's case, the United States has not recognized his legitimacy since 2019, arguing that elections were fraudulent, determinations that affect how US courts treat claims of immunity. Under these circumstances, US courts have held that full head of state immunity may not apply, and immunity does not apply when a leader is acting in a capacity that is not official, such as personal involvement in drug trafficking or terrorism. Then immunity is limited or is not granted. So what the United States is doing in this Maduro case, it has simply framed the Maduro regime as a regime that is not legitimate. And therefore, what it is saying, it is how it is framing the argument is that it is not violating international customs because it hasn't gone and it is not acting against a legitimate sovereign leader. It is a similar argument that has been used for the prosecution of Noriega. Noriega was determined to be a de facto leader and was not, in fact, the de jure head of state of Panama. I say that to recognize the framing of the United States, because I think international relations scholars should recognize this as a new dimension by which the United States is exercising authority. What it does is simply say that the U.S. will use its military might and its sovereign strength in the global community to go after rogue states and rogue leaders. How it does this is by first deeming leaders to be illegitimate. And this is what it has been doing with Venezuela. This is what it has been doing with other countries like Cuba and other states that it's disliked. So it could, in fact, be a pretext for the United States to go into states and actually take over those states or to take action against leaders that they do not like by creating a pretext of illegitimacy. And so when we talk about the argument of the drug trade, what we must recognize that this is you may say either context or pretext by the United States to act in this way, while also saying that we are not violating traditional international law. We are simply purging the international community of rogue elements. And that's why I point out how the U.S. is stressing and framing that particular claim. I want us to move on. You'll have the opportunity to respond even to this, to look at how the President of the United States from his press conference is framing this. Let's listen to this other clip, and then we will move into some of what you have talked about, you have mentioned, and we will develop on those.
In addition, Venezuela unilaterally seized and sold American oil, American assets, and American platforms, costing us billions and billions of dollars. They did this a while ago, but we never had a president that did anything about it. They took all of our property. It was our property. We built it. And we never had a president that decided to do anything about it. Instead, they fought wars that were 10,000 miles away. We built Venezuela oil industry with American talent, drive, and skill, and the socialist regime stole it from us during those previous administrations, and they stole it through force. This constituted one of the largest thefts of American property in the history of our country.
What we have here is this framing exposes the other context for which Maduro has been removed, and raises question as to whether that was just pretext to sort of fit in with the international community. But we hear the President of the United States talking squarely of reclaiming American property, referring to the natural and national resources of another state. So you have one state unilaterally determining that the resources of another is its own. It takes us back to the China, Taiwan, the Venezuela, Guyana issue. And I think that this really is an interesting context to wrap up the discussion, or sort of weave the discussion that has been taking place before into what is before us, because this is not simply a drug fight. When you listen to the President of the United States, he is simply saying that America is using its might to assert what it claims to be a right to property possessed by another sovereign state.
Let me take it for a shot. First of all, they talk about the government not being legitimate and spoke about rigged elections. But only recently we know that President Trump himself in Ecuador, was it Ecuador? No, it's Honduras.
Honduras.
Did he involve himself in the elections in Honduras? Did he involve himself in the elections in Argentina? when he threatened the people if they didn't vote for Milai that he would hold back $20 billion from them. And in his own elections that they had, wasn't this man, the rich man, wasn't he buying votes for Trump in the election that they just had there? So if you're using that, I don't want to bring the elections in Guyana, which we have been famous for, but these are recent things that have been happening here. As far as he said his oil was taken away, I believe that in the 1970s there was a United Nations resolution about the rights of countries to own and control their natural resources. And so maybe countries like my own, which nationalized Reynolds Metal Bauxite Company, then that could be used as an excuse sometime to invade us and take over our country. So I don't think that position stands. The Northern Line movement, based on, and I think they were the ones who pushed the resolutions at the United Nations that countries have a right to own and control their natural resources. And that led to a spate of nationalization throughout the Third World in that period of time.
President Ramatar, before you go on, I think you make another important point that worth pinning and probably some further comment. I play that particular clip and introduce this segment to ask what might be the lesson for Guyana here, and if there is something beneath the skin that Guyana needs to pay attention to. If President Trump seems to be arguing,
it's not much of a lesson because, as I have said, a lot of what we're seeing happening are mere pretexts, to use your term, mere pretexts to them to do what they want. So if our government here does something that they don't like, they can very well excavate this nationalization that took place in the 1970s, the nationalization of Reynolds Metal Company, and say they want back their bauxite. Or
can they also say, with respect to the present oil industry, as they make the claim with Venezuela, that it is their company that built the oil industry?
Well, so they already have most of the oil company already anyhow, because we got 2% royalty and a share of 12.5% of after you deduct 75% of the revenue as expenses, then you share that with us.
That's true. And so what I'm getting at is, if, for instance, Guyana drives a harder, better bargain with Exxon that the United States doesn't like at some point in time, and Guyana, for instance, tries to develop its indigenous industry, could the United States say, as it is saying in Venezuela, we built this oil industry, and therefore, as it is saying, this is our property, we have the right to take action?
Well, I mean, the evidence is showing that they don't even need much of an excuse. They say what they like. And whenever they like, they're creating their own excuses to do anything they like. So I suppose that would be a factor that they hold like the sword of Damocles over our heads. And that could probably well be driving fear in administration to take decisions.
So
I don't know that.
It may be also fear of renegotiating any kind of contract
anywhere in the world, for that matter.
Pardon?
I said it's a fear not only for us, it's a fear for any country that feels that they want to try to get a better deal for their people. Even if you don't even bother with them, but they are insisting that you have to do things their way. If they disapprove of how you want to run your country, that is why they're pressuring Cuba. That is why they turn on the pressure in Venezuela. And many other countries, because these countries were trying to go in a different direction, and they want to ensure that they fail. So I don't think that they need very much they will find any flimsy negligee to cover their intentions of what they want.
What we're trying to look at here is when we take what is given as context or pretext, is there something that our little states and states across the world should say, but wait a minute, could this context or pretext be used against us at some time in the future?
Yeah, and I will say that as we go into the second quarter now of the 21st century, you're seeing it more and more where world powers are continuing to find different avenues to have some type of invasion and extraction of certain things, whether it's resources or whatever, and they will use history. They will use history as probably sometimes as a justification, or use some degree of law based on it is affecting our country, as the United States is doing. But my take on this, I hold no brief for Venezuela, for Maduro. And even if you look at it from a perspective of what happened to Venezuela, the same thing could have very well happened to Trinidad and Tobago, because the previous prime minister, you couldn't get as close to Maduro as Dr. Keith Rowley did. And it meant that, suppose Trinidad and Tobago, we were still under the PNM led by Dr. Keith Rowley, the same thing may have very well happened to Maduro in the middle of the night to Dr. Keith Rowley, because Dr. Keith Rowley was not adhering to singing to the song and the tune of the United States. So yes, it is correct. My take on it is that when we look at what Venezuela have done to the Caribbean, it is no different. It does say it's no different. The United States, they did it all the way. But Venezuela threw the bait, they threw the lines, they made allegations, they made threats both to Guyana and to Trinidad and Tobago. So, just saying do so and like so. The bully has been bullied. And we must look at it from a perspective as, how does this affect CARICOM? Does it benefit CARICOM? We have already seen certain countries now being red flagged with visa restrictions. Do we continue to flex our muscles to demand justice for Venezuela, whilst back at the ranch, it is going to affect our own countries? I beg to differ. My take on it is that Venezuela did very little towards assisting Trinidad and Tobago. They became probably a nuisance in the threats that they were making to us. It put fear throughout all the citizens of my country. And they never did anything to assist in the development of Trinidad and Tobago as it pertains to security, whereas the United States did just the opposite. So we must know where our bread is buttered. We must not condone the decisions made. But this was an action that took place between two countries outside of CARICOM. CARICOM must now see what happens now. I could quickly add my final point on that. Even from Trinidad and Tobago's perspective, Venezuela said point blank, because you're not turning on the United States, because you're not hating the United States, we're going to do for you. We're going to remove the dragon deal. And so Venezuela started putting threats on Trinidad and Tobago that affected Trinidad and Tobago's economy. No, because this is going to benefit Trinidad and Tobago probably, and this could very well be the return of the dragon, not with Bruce Lee, but with Kamala Persad-Bissessor. And that return of the dragon can very well financially benefit Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm not saying that it's about the end justify the means, but I can't shed a tear for what the United States did to Maduro, because Maduro, if you want to play that game, you're going to have to pay the price.
Mr. Griffith, I hear what you're saying, and it's a significant point. I just want to point out one thing, that what I hear President Ramatar and Dr. Curtin saying is this, that countries in the region and across the world should not be nearsighted and look at the issue based upon their immediate gratification, but also should be careful not to usher in a diminishing of international law, customs, and principles that they themselves and their continued existence in the global community depend on. I hear them saying that. I don't hear them saying
I would say
that you are wrong.
Dr. Williams,
go ahead, Dr. Gordon.
Our small, especially the small states of the Caribbean, we have to look at this situation very, very carefully, because we're talking here about maximum pressure. These folks are going to put maximum pressure on these small states. They've started already. As Kendall indicated, they're going a different way. They're going to say that if you got a Cuban medical brigade, then they should go because it's human trafficking. And they could go on and on. So therefore, it's not only the presence or active presence of troops on the ground, it is all different forms of influence which would bring that kind of maximum grief to small states. So I think we have to, as small states in the region, be very concerned looking at that experience here and ensuring that indeed CARICOM has a convergence to ensure that we battle these new issues together.
If I may just quickly say, we got to take out our emotions from it. I mean, I think we in Guyana have more to dislike what Venezuela has done to us than probably any other person in the Caribbean. Venezuela has done a lot of good things for the people in the Caribbean with their Petro-Caribbean program that they had. A lot of countries in the Caribbean benefited of it. But we in Guyana, we suffered. We couldn't develop our Essequibo area for a very long time. When I was president, Venezuela sent a boat to pull off a ship that was drilling, investigating for oil and take it away and so forth. But that will not bring us, it might give us personal satisfaction to say that you have done this to us and what is happening to you is good poetic justice. But if we, as a small country, we have to depend on international laws to protect us. We have to, therefore, we cannot, even in the case of Venezuela, when something illegal is taking place against Venezuela, I don't think that we should be quiet about it because Venezuela has had an unjustified position to us with our borders, with what they did in our borders, with taking over and cocoa, with carrying away, pulling away ships and so forth. Yes, we must condemn those things too as illegal, but we can't condemn those as illegal and don't condemn when something illegal is happening to their people as well. So I think we have to hold on to principles. That is what will save us. That we can't look at these things only from a personal hurt point of view.
No, but at the same time, President Lamtar, we have to recognize that here we have a controversy. This controversy has gone to the multilateral agency, to the United Nations adjudicating body. And yet you hear Venezuela saying, there's no jurisdiction. 3 times, they ain't got jurisdiction. They're going and coming, not sure. And I'm not sure that compliance by Venezuela, if even a judgment is given, I'm sure judgment will be given in favor of Guyana. But when that judgment is given, I have a real question is whether or not any government in Venezuela is going to comply.
Yeah, okay. I don't doubt you. I'm not doubting you. I'm not going to dispute that with you, and that is ahead of us. We will see what will happen. But all I'm saying is that as small countries with limited resources to defend ourselves in many instances, we have to hold on to international law.
Yes.
I want to put this question.
So even though we were a victim of Venezuelan some of these things that you talk about with Venezuela, I don't think that you can support if Venezuela's sovereignty is being violated, and many of the rights are being violated. I don't think that's justified, even though it might give us some personal satisfaction. It would be wrong for us to eventually Venezuela can say, okay, well, Guyana or Trinidad, you uphold illegal things happening to you, so they can do illegal things to us. So I think we have to be principled, and we must hold on to principles, international principles in this regard.
I want to pass it on to Dennis, but I want to make this quick comment that I think Guyana should also consider that if it holds on to strict international principles here, that at a time where Venezuela is on the other side of things, that this could, in essence, also have the effect, in addition to what you have said, of softening relations between Venezuela and Guyana. In the future, if Guyana and Venezuela have to sit at the table, Guyana could always stand tall, and Venezuela may very well remember that here was a country, even though we had bullied it, that it stood firm on principle on our behalf. So you could also have the effect of softening relations with Venezuela if Guyana maintains a principled stand. I want to pass it over to Denis now.
To Professor Curtin and former President Ramatar, what do you see are the possible implications of Venezuela being run temporarily by the United States, and in the context of what has been said by the US President with respect to the oil sector? How do you see this possibly impacting on Venezuela's posture to Guyana with respect to the border controversy? For instance, would the United States want to persuade Guyana to be a bit more quieter, gentler on the border question in the interest of overall exploitation of oil? Should we perhaps consider ceding some access to territory? Are all of these things likely or possible, or do you think that they're off the cards?
Before the panel answer, for the audience, let's provide some context. Let's listen to this clip from President Trump speaking exactly to what you referred to, Denis, and the panel could pick up with their comments.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country.
Mr. President, can you explain the exact mechanism by which you're going to run the country? Are you going to designate a U.S. official to coordinate?
It's all being done right now. We're designating people. We're talking to people. We're designating various people, and we're going to let you know who those people are.
Mr. President, what's the group you mentioned that would run Venezuela?
Well, it's largely going to be, for a period of time, the people that are standing right behind me.
But that's the worst thing that can happen, because that's occupation. That's more than just that's total occupation, direct colonialism, not neo-colonialism. We're going back to the old forms of colonialism. But even that, I think there's another aspect that had been playing in my mind. Since President Trump got into government, he was speaking about expanding the United States as its landmass. And he spoke about taking over Greenland, and he seemed to be taking steps in that regard. He sent an envoy there now. He spoke about taking over Canada, but Canada has stiffened its back a little bit on it. He spoke about Panama. He wants to take over back the Panama Canal and so forth. So it crossed my mind that if President Trump do what he says that he will do, to take over and run Venezuela, whether he will ever give it up again, or whether he will make it another state of the United States as they have made Hawaii a state of the United States. But I mean, I think we're still far away from that as yet, because I think things are very fluid and we can't make great conclusions on that as yet. Trump made that announcement, but then Delcy made another statement and speaking about that Venezuela will not be a colony. And she seems to have the backing of many of the senior people inside Venezuela itself. So I think, as Professor Curtin mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot of moving parts. Things are very, very fluid, and I don't think that we can make definite conclusions of what is. We have to keep looking at the trend, but I think we have to oppose and let our voices be heard when illegality and wrong things are taking place.
So, now, Mr. Trump, when he looked at that clip, first part, Mr. Trump said, "We will run Venezuela." Suggested I'm sure, to most of the Caribbean, the arrogance of power. And when one looks at that, what can we expect, not only in relation to Venezuela, but the small states of this region, which are already under severe duress in some ways? How do we handle that? And one way perhaps is looking to enhance the regional approach and, reduce fragmentation and converge, get some convergences. And so on some specific issues, we get unanimity. The questions like security, we can't have fragmentation there, regional security. And issues like climate change and the environment and rising sea levels, etc. But what I saw there is really a view that we are in charge regardless. And it's not only related to Venezuela. Now, additionally, I listened to the view that oil, that, he says oil companies were going, and if there is short-term production or even medium-term production increases in Venezuela, there could very likely be competition for Guyana. And remember that it will maybe, if the oil production increases, it will enter market already of oversupply, which may bring down the cost of oil and impact the revenues that are currently accruing to Guyana. So we have to look at that too. And there may be a movement away from focus on Guyana by some of the oil companies to those 303 billion barrels, which they boast of in Venezuela, as the largest proven oil reserve. So there may be shifts, to my mind, in the focus on those sectors, and not even only oil. From what I've been seeing, there's some strategic minerals, some rare earth materials, and so forth, that may very well get the attention of the U.S. in the short and medium term. So we have to look carefully, I believe, as to where, because the question is asked, what impact perhaps will be on the oil sector. And I think one of them is looking to see what plays out in relation to the revitalization of the Venezuelan oil sector, and what kind of competition may emerge in the medium term. So those are.
But what I want to hear from you, Dr. Curtin, is whether you think that the United States will stick with its position that it respects the existing borders of Guyana, or it will seek to have a shift in light of its own interest in the energy sector.
Well, for me as a Guyanese, I could never argue for any shift that would reduce 83,000 square miles. When we look at it, strip it of any emotion and argue that Venezuela should go or continue to participate in the International Court of Justice process, the adjudication. There's no other way. And after that, we will have to look to the United States and the international community to ensure that, indeed, once again, compliance with that judgment is ensured.
Dr. Curtin, I want to interject here before Mr. Griffith comes in. The President of the United States said, we will run the country. Mm-hmm. And I want to point out a couple of things here. First, under what law? And under what authority? I don't know that the President of the United States, through the Constitution of the United States and its various arms of government, has authority to run a state that and personnel of the United States that is not a member of the United States. The second thing is, which law will apply? And here's where I think Mr. Griffith will come in, because if you're a police officer, are you enforcing the laws of Venezuela or the laws of the United States? What about the judiciary? With all of the judges of the courts, the judicial system in Venezuela be replaced, and under what authority and what laws? What happens to the legislature in Venezuela? Because even if the United States was to pass a directive and it is challenged by any member of the community by a court, and the court rules that the policy that the United States dictates is unlawful, what happens next? So the declaration that we will run the country raises significant questions. The United States would only be able to do that if it truly annexes the country, suspends the Constitution, and imposes a completely new order in the country. I would love to hear your reaction to that, Dr. Curtin. I have a follow-up to it, but I wanted to stick to that scenario. Any thoughts?
Go ahead.
Any one of you,
Yeah,
Mr.
well,
Griffith, as a lawman,
Yeah.
you might.
Yeah. So the how can I put it? The situation that is taking place right now is that it is very grave. The comment made by President Trump, first he said, because the goalpost has shifted, and I don't know if we are aware of it, when he said that we are taking control, we are having a group. He then threw it, and now we're hearing that the vice president is now running the show. Initially, I thought that meant she was the sellout. She was the one that she's now succumbed, and she's going to be a puppet to the United States. Lo and behold, I'm seeing a Michael Jackson walk here now, where she's still pushing the Maduro agenda, insisting that Maduro is still the president. So something has gone wrong. And if I think the initial plan would have been, okay, we've removed your president because of criminal acts, so the vice president will now take over. So we have not infringed on your sovereignty or your constitution. The vice president will run the show, but we put you there, we are appointing you, so you will listen to what we say. If she is not doing that and not adhering to that, we can very well be prepared to stand by for phase 2 of the operation. So this is not over as yet. I thought when I heard the comments with Delcy, I thought they controlled her and they had her under wrap. That is not what has happened. So
Mr. Griffith, if she attempts to enforce a policy or an order or a request that someone takes to the court, and the court finds it to be unconstitutional or illegal, would the United States then say, you don't follow our order, we're sending the military back into into Venezuela? That's the scenario.
That is what is going to happen. That's why, remember, he threw that line in phase 2 of the operation. Phase 2 is, if this doesn't go the way we prepare by keeping you all there to run, but you're going to run it towards how we decided and how we designed it.
There is no authority, clear line of authority, because the executive speaks to the executive, and there are other branches of government. One would expect, because this seems to be an adventure that is a very curious adventure. How do you run a country if the executive cannot be tamed by the judiciary and the legislature? What if the legislature passes a law? How do you then say that the person functioning as the head of the executive should face what? Extraction from Venezuela for complying with the courts of Venezuela and the judiciary of the legislature of Venezuela? That's what I'm trying to find out.
Yeah,
if you don't remove these things and impose a complete new judicial system and legislative system, what then would happen? Do you have a puppet courts and puppet parliament?
No, again, what we have seen in many countries over the last few hundred years, martial law could set in. Martial law can now say that the government has now collapsed. The government having collapsed, the military has now taken over. And the reason I'm throwing that line is that the Delta forces are second to none. I did training and stuff with special forces in the United States, United Kingdom, but they are not that brilliant that they did exactly what they did, just without anyone even being shot at. many persons within the Venezuelan military sold out. That is common sense. That you can see it was. When it was the bodyguards, the security, that they assisted and succumbed when it is to the almighty US dollar or whatever. That could very well happen right now, where the senior military officers could very well be the persons. And then with that we have seen it all over the world so often, where the military takes control, removes the sitting government, and then say that because the government has collapsed, the military will now take over. If the military takes over, that is now under the control of the United States. Then the United States now has accomplished their mission, which is taking control of Venezuela. They cannot take control of Venezuela based on the president just stating from up in North America, we will have a group run it. If those persons in Venezuela say, no, that's not true, there's confrontation, there's conflict, and it means something has to give. And it could and that's where I speak about phase 2 of the operation. The United States.
Where I'm getting to here with this is that, in effect, what you're talking about is another colony, as Mr. Ramattar has put it, President Ramattar puts it, of the United States, or another annexed state of the United States, because authority has to flow from some direction. For instance, even Congress could act against a United States official that is acting beyond the statutory authority that, let's say, for instance, the Secretary of State has. The Secretary of State in the United States is controlled by statute, and the statute has limits. So that's why I'm asking, if you do not have an act of Congress that formally does this, and you do not have an actual occupation of Venezuela, suspension of its laws, suspension of its judiciary, the expulsion of its parliament, how it is that you're really doing that? That's the point that I'm asking, because you could have legal action, and you could have congressional action and impeachment at the level of Congress in the United States, and you could also have legal processes in Venezuela itself.
But Dr. Williams,
Mr. Williams, you're talking about law, but the United States is not respecting anybody's law. They're doing what they feel like they have the power. They have the real power, the military power that is running things. It's not the law. And this has been happening. You see, a lot of people have been keeping quiet about what was going on in Gaza, keeping quiet about several things that have been happening all over. And all in the meantime, the international law has been undermined, and the international institutions are being destroyed. I don't know if you remember that Iran accused which is a branch of the United Nations, the IAEA, I think is the initial of it, the energy sector, of spying on them for Israel and the United States. That is how they kill a lot of their scientists and their military people. So they're destroying these things. Up to now, the Secretary General of the United States, the Secretary General of the United Nations, has not said that what is taking place in Gaza is a genocide. Why? Why he's not saying that? So when you depending on law, what my position is that we have to fight for the reinstitution of the laws. The laws are being destroyed.
Well, before you come in, Mr. Corton, Dr. Corton, I want to follow up with President Ramattar, because he also raised the issue at the start that people in Guyana who responded to his comment didn't think through the issue carefully. I want to put an issue here. It is more an issue for legal minds, but surely at the level of each of you, it would be something that you would consider. If Venezuela is not effectively an independent state, and Venezuela has legal proceedings at this point in time, though commence before it loses its status as an independent functioning nation, and the international court were to rule in favor of Guyana, could that be a context or an issue that Venezuela could subsequently raise, that these proceedings occurred while a country could not independently and properly adjudicate for itself.
No, that's why we have to fight for those laws, Chief. That is why it benefits us, a small country, that the international laws benefit us, protect us in many ways. And that is why I'm so passionate about it, because what I'm seeing is a destruction of those laws. And we have to try to stop it and reinstitute it. That is the main task, I believe, that is ahead of us. Otherwise, we're back to the law of the jungle.
Dr. Carton?
Survival of the fittest.
Well, two things. I don't know if a nation state could disappear and having, being part of the United Nations and all of those multilateral institutions, Venezuela would just be written off. And I believe that when you look at what the Delcy Rodriguez role now, it may be part of a tactic, because I still believe that the grand strategy is questionable. Maybe a tactic in the first phase to have some level of continuity. I don't know, Mr. Trump's advisors might have looked at it also to say that, look, we have to ensure that Venezuela will be run by us, yes, but we have a Venezuelan who already has a significant element of the Venezuelan populace still Chavista, and it could be controlled by that structure. I mean, I saw it yesterday, the Supreme Court of Venezuela appointed Delcy Rodriguez, and I saw no negative reaction from any place. So to me, if looking at it, I mean, right now, suggests that it may be part of that in phase one, or the first part of this activity. The tactic is to ensure that we can negotiate with her. There's some institutions still in place, and let's see at the second phase, which may be, bringing all the others into the fray, including Maria, what's her name, Corina Machado, no? Corina Machado into it. Then it could be part of that kind of strategic thinking. But I had a little bit of a difficulty seeing why it is that you have the Delcy Rodriguez in a situation in which the United States says that they're running things, and Mr. Trump naming her and removing any element that takes into consideration the opposition that said that won the last election. He actually said that Ms. Machado had no respect, is not respected in Venezuela, and can't run, can't rule. So that to me was also significant.
But if he names her as how he describes it, as a puppet of the United States who will do what the United States wants, could that not be a way of setting her up for a sort of a revolt against her that results in her own demise from the people in Venezuela and the other military people that may no longer trust her authority, and then that creates the pretext for after her authority wanes, that then you bring in a new authority. So could this not just simply be a good strategic move? I think there is a lot that we might not know in terms of how people are playing their hands.
But Mr. Griffith talked about the second phase, which if that brings the levels of instability, you might have to have quote unquote boots on the ground, more boots, and the second phase could emerge if there's that pushback.
What President Trump, given we started off by layering the context that congressional opposition has emerged to the actions of President Trump, would Mr. Trump have the support of Congress and his people to put boots on the ground.
Well, I don't believe that any regime change could occur in Venezuela without the kind of secure arrangement for whoever they take on as a new leader in Venezuela. And regime change is costly, it is surely lengthy, and a level of uncertainty is always there. So when you're talking here about what may unfold, the scenario that you painted there with possible pushback against Delcy Rodriguez could have an impact that introduces that second phase of the movement of troops, etc., in large numbers, which will be a difficult task, given the terrain, given given the Chavista linkages and all that, which could be a difficult task for the United States.
Again, my take on it is that I personally believe we are actually, what we are trying to do now is try to understand the mindset of Donald Trump. That I think is virtually impossible for any human being to do. We do not know exactly what his game plan is. So we are coming up with ideas and perceptions as to what his plan is. The ideal thing I would have thought was to just rally behind the opposition leader, where it is perceived by most of the world that she really won and Maduro rigged the election. That could have, you could have probably got a buy-in there and brought her back. He didn't, as Dr. Curtin said, he didn't. So he sidelined her and he stayed with Delcy. Delcy is now singing a different tune. So we actually do not know and understand what his mindset is. My take on it is I'm going right back. This is not in any way to say that because we are not openly protesting and making bold statements against the United States, I think personally there's a saying, that when the elephant fights, the grass is trampled. And we are spending so much time trying to justify why we must stand firm as CARICOM to support Venezuela. My take on it is that that man does not deserve the defense that we must give him. He went and did, and even what he did was virtually threatening two countries in CARICOM to get into their territory because he felt might was right. And now he's getting a piece of his own medicine. My take on it is, if that is the way, and it is going to help Trinidad and Tobago, it is going to help CARICOM, so be it. It may be perceived, it may be, my military training is on that. I am looking after the well-being of the citizens of my country. Had we turned a blind eye and decided to stay firm and say we're supporting Venezuela, we're against the United States, visas would have been banned of all Trinidad and Tobago citizens. Tariffs would have been imposed. And the United States would have turned their backs on a country, Trinidad and Tobago, to provide security support against another country that has already on 3 occasions made threats to invade our own country. So I think the focus should really be on how does CARICOM benefit from this? Where do we go from here? I'm not saying, but this is to say that it's not about turning a blind eye, but for us to just go boldly and put on capes to try to be in solidarity of Venezuela. Maduro does not deserve it.
I wanna take us to the wrap up with this comment in response to this whole discussion. In order to prepare for the future, one has to want to take one's mind wandering into the unknown and identifying variables and understand those variables to be able to predict what the future holds. This uncertainty is something that CARICOM and the region and the leaders of the region must pay attention, because it may spell the reality of the future. Here is what I would like to put before I move on to wrap up. That the authority of a country that holds it back from anarchy, when removed, is not easily replaced by new authority. The United States has learned this through history in Iraq, Afghanistan, everywhere where it went, and simply displaced an existing authority that held a society together and replace it with a completely new authority. To dismantle the authority that holds Venezuela together, whether dictatorial, authoritative, or otherwise, would mean that there would be a vacuum in authority in the country, and therefore interim anarchy. History has shown that new authority to govern and hold a society together doesn't prop up overnight, because that authority comes from culture and it comes from a whole host of historical things that take time to develop. And I think that the President of the United States sought to avoid the chaos of anarchy that is the historical legacy of the United States by trying to hold authority in place. What I think he did not calculate and did not think about is how does this authority function in the context that he wishes it to function. With that, I want to segue into the wrap up by playing this last clip, and then I'll come back to the panel and ask for your closing thoughts.
All the way back, it dated to the Monroe Doctrines. And the Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Donroe Document. I don't know. It's Monroe Doctrine. We sort of forgot about it. It was very important, but we forgot about it. We don't forget about it anymore. Under our new national security strategy, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. Won't happen.
I now ask you for your closing thoughts, taking into consideration this Monroe Doctrine, this control, this might that the United States has asserted that it is now going to exercise in the hemisphere and even in the control of the resources of Venezuela, such as oil and other resources. I'd like you to hem up and offer your final thoughts. Would it mean that if, for instance, Guyana in the development of its oil sector lean to other countries and industries from other countries that the United States disfavors, that it will view that as some level of hostility, that the Monroe Doctrine will be introduced? If Trinidad was to try to pin its development by looking beyond the Western Hemisphere, could there be consequences for that? In whatever order you wish, you may give your wrap up at this point.
Well, I can open the bottom line up in it, and that is the right of the United States. It is their right. It is our right. I recall when I had an issue with 100,000 illegal immigrants in Trinidad and Tobago. And I said I need to start sending persons back because they are a threat to national security and a liability to the public purse. I got massive feedback from other islands in the Caribbean that attacked me, and they wanted to start boycotting Trinidad products. That is their right, but it was my right to look after the well-being and the security interests of Trinidad and Tobago. So if in the case of the United States, likewise when I was Minister of National Security and Commissioner, I had meetings with the US. The US were very concerned about the Keith Rowley administration's close affiliation with China. And they said if it is that we continue to go down that direction, they could easily start to flex their muscles, turn the screw on up, whether it is increased tariffs, not try to affect trade. That is their right. It may be deemed as trying to bully themselves or monopoly, but the same way it is that CARICOM countries try to bully Trinidad and Tobago. When I said, if persons are criminal elements or a threat to the national security, I want to send you back. And I was threatened. What is the difference? So I'm not trying to justify it, but that is what can and very well will happen. What we again should do is go back to the situation here, where the United States have been very instrumental to provide the safety and security of the Caribbean, not Trinidad and Tobago, through the Caribbean Islands Nation Security Conference, CANSEC, trade winds. They've worked with impacts. They've worked with the Transnational Organized Crime Unit. They provided training, equipment, technology, assistance. They were providing me with 2 destroyers in exchange for a FW radar. The day Venezuela could provide 0.001% of that, then I could start saying, well, look, let me start jumping on the Venezuela bandwagon to support them based on what they're going through right now. My take on it is that we need to look after our well-being. And if it is that we decide to play too strong, we could very well end up in the same situation as Venezuela. It isn't about us succumbing to U.S. doctrine. This is about us knowing where our bread is buttered. And if it is that Venezuela are in a situation with the United States, neither is part of CARICOM. CARICOM should look after the interests of CARICOM. We didn't jump on the bandwagon for Ukraine with Russia. We haven't jumped on the bandwagon for Taiwan with China. We haven't jumped on, and all of a sudden we are jumping on a bandwagon of a country led by a warmonger who went out of his way to try to state that he wants to invade Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago because of his eager agenda. If it is that he was removed, the end justifies the mean. What we need to do now is to look forward to find avenues to ensure that the United States will not go in that direction with us through mutual agreement, contractual obligations that can assist in enhancing the infrastructure for energy sector, both in Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, because when those energy sector companies from the United States come to Venezuela, it can spread, and it can spread and enhance the economic development of Guyana, which has been blocked by the same Venezuela in Essequibo, Your Excellency, that you spoke about. It has affected Trinidad and Tobago. So I am seeing lemonade in the lemon that has been taken place with Venezuela. Maduro, he played his hand and he lost, and now it's for CARICOM to find a way to benefit from it.
Well, for me, in relation to the Monroe Doctrine, that goes beyond, to my mind, the current issue in Venezuela. It suggests that here we have a country that is no longer talking about multilateral approaches, but rather taking power, using the raw power to influence all states and their conditions and their thinking. I therefore believe that countries of the region will have to diversify their linkages and alliances broadly in the hemisphere. My view is that when you look at what is taking place, that we have to, through our diplomatic efforts and greater interaction with countries of Latin America, attempt to ensure that we broaden our range, our reach, to ensure that we have more strategic support to ensure that our interests are protected. I mean, the countries that are strong, we have in Guyana's immediate neighbor, Brazil, a very reliable partner so far that I believe we should kind of hitch on to more strategically. We look at other states of the region, we look at Colombia, Mexico, some of the states of CELAC, and also some in the South American region, Mercosur states that have similar interests, that we need to, in a sense, diversify and enhance, diversify and bring on board those that we never had, and in a sense, enhance alliances with those. We have to be what I term, we have to engage in responsible pragmatism as the Caribbean, as CARICOM, to ensure that we don't write off our linkages, but intend to enhance them even with the United States.
President Ramatar?
I will stick that the most important thing is for us to fight for principles, for universal international laws. I don't think that we should allow ourselves to be beaten down by just fear, that we should, because otherwise our sovereignty will have no meaning for us. I think that the international laws are what protects us. If it's being violated, we should fight against the violation of those laws, and we should try to reinstate them and ensure that the international institutions are formed up, become more fair, not to allow themselves to be used in the interest of one power or the other, but to run by laws. Otherwise, we will have anarchy, we will have the law of the jungle, and it will not be in our interest. I strongly believe, my whole political life I've run through, I've started my political life when our country was still a colony. And therefore, independence means a lot to me. And freedom and sovereignty means something to me. And I think it must have meaning, and it should not be that because a country is stronger militarily and can invade you and kill your own security and take over and do what they like. I don't think that benefits us. I don't think that benefits us. And our main goal should be continue to fight for international laws, the respect for international laws, and respect for international institutions.
While small and weak states may well be rolling down a slippery cliff in blindfolds. This is Caribbean Tea. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks to our panelists, Dr. Mark Curtin, former Commissioner Gary Griffith, and former President Donald Ramotar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.